Okay, I know you missed quite a bit of that. I'm trying to do this by myself, and getting the camera set up is pretty difficult. But what the explanation I gave is really good, even though you didn't get to see a demonstration. When you do the rear, again, I look for the bony protrusions. The main ones in the rear is simpler than the front. You've got your hip joint, important. Below the hip joint is your greater trochanter. You have one, too. Obviously the knees, the hock, the foot. On the inside of the leg, you have the lesser trochanter. Between the hip, the greater trochanter and lesser trochanter and the sit bone, you probably have 15 to 20 muscles attached. The greater trochanter alone has 9. So it's really important to work those bony protrusions. So when I do the rear, I work on the hip. Again, the same thing. I sink in and rotate. And from the hip to the rib, the loin area, that's where the iliopsoas is and stuff. A lot of people talk about that, I think, more than it needs to, but it does get sore. So again, I'm sinking in and rotating, in and rotating. Okay? If the dog reacts real strongly, you can lessen it up a bit, all right? You know, and then try to go in a little deeper. But I'm sinking in probably a good 1/4 of an inch into her. So I put my finger down and then I sink. Okay, along the back of the ribs, again, another important point. So I just wrap my little fingers around her ribs and massage. Now the hip, I find the hip, and I just do a circle around the whole hip, okay? Because the hip to the greater trochanter is a really tiny area. It's only about that long. So there's a lot of stuff going on in here. So I just work that whole area, top of it, middle of it, bottom of it. And again, I'm sinking in and going around those bony protrusions, which leads you to the sit bone, which every muscle attached to the sit bone goes to the knee. It's the hamstrings. And what I find with most of the dogs is that the part of the sit bone that's most sore is the innermost part, closest to the anus, basically. So I make sure that I work that entire sit bone area. It's a pretty big bone in the dog compared to in people. And there's, again, a lot of muscle attachments. One thing to check on that, and you can see I'm hitting points that are sore. That's why she's starting to sit up. If you can't easily raise the tail, if it gets stiff, it's often because sit bone area into the glutes are sore. Dogs do not have big glutes, neither do horses, but they're still incredibly important. A dog that jumps and runs a lot uses its glutes, and its glutes are above the hip to that sit bone area. So you want to work those, and that's what helps raises the tail. And now I've moved over her spine, okay? And then the same thing here, I go to from the sit bone. I don't worry a whole lot at first about the big muscle in the rear, and I go to her knee. Her knee, the attachments from the sit bone attach at the knee. So I find the bony protrusion, the bony part of the knee, and massage that behind, then underneath. Okay, the knee's pretty big, so work that whole area as best you can. And then the front of the knee. That's important too. As you see, I get a reaction here. Dice is much sorer on her left than she's on her right. I've already done her right side this morning. But knees are important, so I am doing the exact front of the knee. From the top all the way down to the bottom. Then, once I've worked these outer protrusions, are we still getting some reaction? And what I try to do is do this, do some other stuff, come back and check. On the inside of the leg, if you find your greater trochanter, there's a lesser trochanter. It's a little bit below and in line. If you find the lesser trochanter and massage it correctly, the leg will open up like that. You notice she had her leg bent, and then if you find it, it opens. That's the connection that straightens the leg out for the dog. So again, another important one, and I work that down into the knee. And then I go, and you did a good job, I didn't see you do your rear, but again, first I work the top of the rear into the hock, bony protrusion, I work the front, and then I work the underside with my other fingers and work down into the foot. Okay, we're stopping. Does it stay?